The observation deck of the Galactic Council's flagship hummed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered to witness humanity's first official diplomatic mission. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the center of attention, her small frame dwarfed by the towering aliens surrounding her. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing less than most alien children, she looked impossibly delicate among the massive Chronari warriors, the crystalline Zephyrians, and the hulking Brutaxian delegates. "Look at that tiny thing," whispered Commander Thrak of the Chronari Defense Corps, his voice carrying easily across the chamber despite his attempt at discretion.
"How did such a weak species even survive long enough to develop space travel?"
The other delegates murmured their agreement. The humans had appeared seemingly from nowhere, claiming a small system on the outer rim of the galaxy. Their ships were primitive by galactic standards, their technology decades behind even the most basic Council member species. Most shocking of all, their physiology seemed laughably fragile compared to the battle-hardened races that dominated known space. Elena had heard it all before during the preliminary meetings. The Chronari, who could crush steel with their bare hands, found human bone density amusing. The Zephyrians, whose crystalline bodies could withstand temperature extremes that would instantly kill most life forms, were baffled by humanity's need for environmental suits. The gas-breathing Vortani couldn't understand how a species that required such a narrow band of atmospheric conditions had ever left their homeworld. "Esteemed delegates," Elena began, her voice steady despite the obvious dismissal in the room, "I understand that humanity appears different from the established members of this council. We may seem physically weaker, technologically inferior, and perhaps even evolutionarily questionable in your eyes." A ripple of what could charitably be called laughter echoed through the chamber. The Brutaxian ambassador's translator rendered his species' equivalent of amusement as a sound like grinding metal. "However," Elena continued, raising her voice just enough to cut through the noise, "I would like to propose a simple demonstration. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would endanger anyone present. Simply an opportunity to show you what we humans call adaptability." The Chronari delegate leaned forward, his massive bulk casting a shadow over the human ambassador. "What sort of demonstration could a creature like you possibly offer that would impress this assembly? Can you lift a Brutaxian warhammer, survive in the vacuum of space, generate the electromagnetic fields necessary for faster-than-light communication?" Elena smiled, and something in that expression made several of the closer delegates unconsciously step back. It wasn't threatening exactly, but there was a quality to it that suggested hidden depths, like looking into still water and suddenly realizing you couldn't see the bottom. "Nothing so dramatic. Commander Thrak, I was thinking of something more practical. You see, 3 hours ago, your flagship's main computer core began experiencing cascade failures in its quantum processing matrix. The failures are intermittent but growing more frequent. Your engineering team has been working on the problem since it started, but they're having trouble isolating the source." The chamber fell silent. Commander Thrak's face went through several colors before settling on a deep purple that his species displayed when extremely agitated. "How could you possibly know about classified maintenance issues aboard a council vessel?" he demanded. Elena's smile widened slightly. "The same way I know that the Zephyrian delegate's environmental suit is leaking trace amounts of their homeworld's atmosphere, creating a small but growing cloud of crystallization particles near the ventilation intake. And the same way I know that the Brutaxian ambassador's translator is running on a backup power cell because the primary unit failed during yesterday's diplomatic dinner." The delegates exchanged glances, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by something approaching concern. The Vortani representative's gas-filled helmet fogged briefly, their species equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. "These are highly classified technical details," the Zephyrian delegate said, their crystalline voice chiming like wind bells. "Our security protocols specifically prevent such information from being accessible to outside parties." "And your security protocols are excellent," Elena agreed. "But you see, humans have a particular talent. We're very good at noticing things. We watch, we listen, we analyze. We see patterns where others see chaos, and we find connections where others see isolated incidents. It's how we survived on a world that was actively trying to kill us for most of our evolutionary history." She gestured to a nearby display panel, and with a few quick movements, called up a holographic representation of the ship's infrastructure systems. "Your quantum processing matrix is failing because of harmonic Resonance between your artificial gravity generators and the primary computer core. The resonance frequency matches the natural oscillation pattern of your ship's hull material when it's under the specific gravitational stress created by having all 12 Council species aboard simultaneously. The additional mass distribution is creating micro-vibrations that your systems weren't designed to handle. Commander Thrak stared at the display, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to something that might have been respect. The solution, Elena continued, is to adjust the artificial gravity generators to operate on a rotating frequency pattern rather than a steady output. This will break up the harmonic resonance without affecting the comfort or safety of anyone aboard. The adjustment will take approximately 17 minutes to implement and will resolve the cascade failures completely. She turned to address the other delegates. As for the environmental suit leak, the crystallization particles can be neutralized by introducing a small amount of heated nitrogen into the air circulation system. And the translator issue can be resolved by bypassing the primary power, coupling and running directly from the ship's auxiliary power grid. The chamber remained silent for long moments as the delegates processed what they had just heard. Finally, the Vortani representative spoke. Their voice filtered through their atmospheric processor. You diagnosed complex technical problems aboard an unfamiliar vessel using only observational data gathered during casual social interaction? Elena nodded. Humans are natural problem solvers, delegate. We had to be. Our homeworld taught us that survival depends not on being the strongest or the fastest or the most heavily armored. It depends on being adaptable, resourceful, and above all, clever. We learned to use our minds to overcome obstacles that should have been impossible to surmount. Commander Thrak was speaking quietly into his communicator, presumably relaying Elena's suggestions to his engineering team. After several minutes, he looked up, his expression completely transformed. Our chief engineer confirms your analysis, he said slowly. The harmonic resonance pattern you described matches their readings exactly. They're implementing your suggested corrections now. Elena inclined her head graciously. I'm glad I could help, Commander. And this brings me to humanity's formal request for Council membership. We may not be the strongest or the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, but we offer something equally valuable. The ability to see solutions where others see only problems. 2 weeks after Elena's initial demonstration, the Galactic Council faced its first real test of humanity's claimed abilities. The mining colony on Kepler 442c had gone silent, and 3 separate rescue missions had failed to return. The planet was a hostile world of extreme temperatures, toxic atmosphere, and gravitational anomalies that made standard approach protocols nearly impossible. The emergency session convened with representatives from every major council species, arguing over the best course of action. The Chronari favored a full military assault, deploying their most heavily armored vessels and troops capable of surviving the planet's harsh conditions. The Brutaxians suggested using automated mining drones to establish a beachhead before sending in biological forces. The Zephyrians proposed creating a crystalline network to stabilize the gravitational anomalies from orbit. Elena sat quietly through 6 hours of increasingly heated debate, taking notes on a simple tablet while the various species outlined plan after plan, each more complex and resource-intensive than the last. Finally, when the arguments had devolved into territorial posturing and species-specific accusations, she cleared her throat. If I may suggest an alternative approach, she began, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through fog. Commander Thrak, who had become something of an unlikely ally since the computer core incident, gestured for silence. The human ambassador has something to contribute. Thank you, Commander. I've been analyzing the available data on Kepler 442c, and I believe the previous rescue missions failed not because of the planet's environmental hazards, but because they approached the problem as a military or technological challenge. The gravitational anomalies, temperature extremes, and atmospheric toxicity are symptoms of a much larger issue. She activated the chamber's main display, showing a 3-dimensional model of the planet and its surrounding space. The mining operation was extracting rare earth elements from the planet's core, specifically ziridium and quantum crystalline compounds. But the extraction pattern shows they were following the richest veins without regard for the planet's geological stability. They've been mining along major fault lines and removing material from load-bearing geological structures. The Brutaxian delegate's massive head tilted in what his species used as an expression of confusion. Mining operations always follow the richest deposits. This is standard procedure across the galaxy. Standard procedure for stable worlds, yes. But Kepler 442c isn't stable. It's a planet in the final stages of geological death, held together by a delicate balance of internal pressures and gravitational forces. The mining operation didn't just extract materials, they destabilized the entire planetary structure. Elena manipulated the display to show the planet's internal structure, highlighting the areas where mining had taken place. The gravitational anomalies aren't random. They're the result of mass redistribution as the planet's core begins to collapse. The temperature extremes are caused by internal heat sources being exposed to the surface through newly created fissures. The atmospheric toxicity is from deep Earth gases being released through those same fissures. The chamber fell quiet as the implications became clear. The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline form rang like a struck bell as they processed the information. "Are you saying the entire planet is collapsing?" they asked. "Not collapsing exactly, but definitely restructuring itself. And every attempt to land heavy equipment or large numbers of personnel is accelerating the process. The planet's geological sensors are reading each rescue mission as another potential mining operation and responding accordingly." Commander Thrak leaned forward, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "What do you propose?" Elena smiled, and once again several delegates found themselves unconsciously stepping back from that expression. "We go small. One ship, minimal crew, no heavy equipment. We treat this as a search and rescue operation, not a military campaign. We work with the planet's natural processes instead of fighting against them." "Impossible," the Brutaxian delegate rumbled. No single ship could survive the approach to that world, let alone conduct effective rescue operations on the surface. "A single council ship couldn't. No. Your vessels are designed for different priorities: maximum protection, overwhelming firepower, advanced technological systems. They're too large, too heavy, and too rigid for this kind of operation." Elena called up the specifications for a human exploration vessel, and the display showed a ship that looked impossibly fragile compared to the massive Council warships. "This is the Endeavor, one of humanity's long-range exploration vessels. No armor to speak of, minimal weapon systems, crew complement of just 12 individuals. By Council standards, it's barely qualified to be called a spacecraft. Then how could it possibly succeed where our most advanced vessels have failed?" the Vortani representative demanded, their atmospheric processor whirring with agitation. "Because it's not designed to overpower hostile environments. It's designed to adapt to them. Our exploration vessels are built for flexibility, not strength. They can reconfigure their internal systems on the fly, operate with minimal resources, and most importantly, they're designed to be operated by humans." Elena gestured to herself, her small frame once again emphasizing the apparent fragility that had originally drawn the Council's dismissive comments. "Humans are persistence hunters, delegates. On our homeworld, we didn't run faster than our prey or overpower it with strength. We followed it until it collapsed from exhaustion. We adapted to every environment it fled to. We outlasted creatures that should have been able to kill us easily." She turned to address Commander Thrak directly. "Your people are warriors, Commander, and you're very good at it. But this isn't a battle to be won through superior firepower. This is a puzzle to be solved through patience and adaptability. And you believe you can solve it? I believe we can try something different." The mining colony has been silent for 3 weeks, but the initial distress signal indicated at least 40% of the personnel were still alive when communications were lost. If they've found shelter in the deeper mine shafts, they might still be alive. But every day we spend debating optimal approach strategies is a day those people don't have. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates argued the merits of Elena's proposal. Some species saw it as a reasonable alternative to the failed military approaches. Others viewed it as a dangerous waste of time and resources, risking human lives on what appeared to be a desperate gamble. Elena waited patiently for the arguments to run their course, then spoke again. "There's something else to consider. If the planet's geological structure continues to destabilize, the gravitational anomalies will eventually affect the entire system. The gas giant that Kepler 442c orbits could see its own orbital mechanics disrupted, potentially threatening shipping lanes and established colonies throughout this sector. This isn't just about rescuing 43 miners. It's about preventing a much larger catastrophe. That sobering observation brought the discussion to an abrupt halt. The economic implications alone were staggering. The shipping lanes through the system carried nearly 15% of the galaxy's interstellar commerce. Commander Thrak stood slowly, his massive form drawing the attention of every delegate in the chamber. The Chronary Defense Corps will provide escort vessels for the human rescue mission, he announced. We will maintain a safe distance and provide support as needed, but operational command will remain with Ambassador Vasquez. One by one, the other delegates agreed to support the mission, though Elena could see the skepticism in their expressions. They were gambling on humanity's untested abilities because the alternative was accepting the loss of both the miners and, potentially, an entire star system as the session concluded and delegates began filing out. Commander Thrak approached Elena privately. Ambassador, I hope you understand what you've committed to. If this mission fails, it won't just be the miners who are lost. The Council's faith in humanity will be lost as well. Elena nodded solemnly. I understand, Commander, but sometimes the only way to prove what you're capable of is to attempt something that should be impossible. The Endeavour dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and immediately Elena understood why 3 Council rescue missions had failed. The gravitational readings were unlike anything in the navigation databases. Space-time itself seemed to be twisting around the planet in unpredictable patterns that would tear apart any ship trying to plot a conventional approach. Vector, Captain Torres, what's our status? Elena asked, floating in the zero-gravity observation bubble that served as the ship's primary command center during delicate operations. Captain Maria Torres, a veteran of humanity's most dangerous exploration missions, was studying the sensor readings with the calm focus that had kept her alive through encounters with quantum storms, dark matter anomalies, and hostile alien ecosystems. The gravitational distortions are worse than the Council data indicated, she reported. The planet's mass distribution is shifting constantly. It's like trying to land on a target that's changing its location every few seconds. Elena drifted closer to the sensor display, her mind already working through the problem. Around the bridge, the rest of the crew went about their preparations with the quiet efficiency that marked experienced human spacers. No panic, no dramatic declarations of impossibility, just professionals adapting to an unexpected challenge. Dr. Chen, what's your analysis of the geological data? Elena called to the mission's chief scientist. Dr. Sarah Chen had been studying alien geology for 15 years, and her expertise had been specifically requested for this mission. She manipulated the holographic display to show a cross-section of the planet's interior structure. The mining operations created a cascade failure in the planet's structural integrity, she explained. The core is trying to redistribute its mass to compensate for the extracted materials, but the process is happening too quickly for the crustal layers to adjust smoothly. We're seeing massive tectonic shifts every few hours, which explains the gravitational anomalies, added Lieutenant Rodriguez from the navigation station. The planet's mass keeps shifting, so its gravitational field keeps changing. Any ship trying to maintain a stable orbit gets caught in the fluctuations. Elena studied the data, her expression thoughtful. The Council's rescue missions had all followed standard protocols. Establish stable orbit, deploy reconnaissance drones, then send down heavily shielded landing craft to specific coordinates. But standard protocols assumed a predictable environment. Captain, what's the smallest approach window we'd need to reach the surface? Torres consulted her navigation computer. For a conventional landing, we'd need at least 6 hours of gravitational stability. The current fluctuation pattern gives us maybe 20 minutes between major shifts. 20 minutes, Elena mused. What could we accomplish in 20 minutes? Not much with conventional equipment, Torres admitted. The Council's landing protocols require extensive setup time, environmental scans, and safety margins that assume worst-case scenarios. But we're not using conventional equipment, Elena pointed out. We're humans. Dr. Chen, if you had to get to the planet's surface with minimal resources and maximum speed, how would you do it? Dr. Chen grinned, and Elena recognized the expression. It was the same look human engineers got when presented with an interesting technical challenge. Skip the orbital mechanics entirely. We don't try to establish orbit at all. Instead, we use the gravitational fluctuations to our advantage. Time our approach to ride the waves of gravitational change rather than fighting against them. Like surfing, Lieutenant Rodriguez said, understanding immediately. Use the planet's own instability to carry us down to the surface. Elena nodded. Exactly. But that's just getting there. Once we're on the surface, we still need to locate survivors and extract them safely. The mining colony's original plans show an extensive network of underground tunnels, Dr. Chen reported. If the survivors took shelter in the deeper levels, they'd be protected from the worst of the surface instability. But they'd also be difficult to locate with standard scanning equipment. Elena turned to address the entire crew. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to attempt something that every standard protocol says is impossible. We're going to land on an unstable planet, using an approach that would horrify any Council flight instructor. Search for survivors in a tunnel network that may be partially collapsed, and extract them using equipment that most galactic species would consider inadequate for basic exploration. The crew exchanged glances, and Elena saw the same expression on every face, excitement mixed with professional determination. This was what they had trained for, what humanity did best. The impossible missions that required adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to risk everything on an untested idea. Captain Torres, begin approach calculations for gravitational surfing. Dr. Chen, I want you to design a search pattern that assumes the tunnels have been altered by the seismic activity. Lieutenant Rodriguez, prepare the emergency extraction protocols. As the crew bent to their tasks, Elena activated the communication system to contact Commander Thrax's escort fleet, which was maintaining position at the edge of the system. Commander, we're beginning our approach to the planet. Please maintain your current position and do not attempt to provide assistance unless specifically requested. Understood, Ambassador. Our sensors show the gravitational anomalies intensifying. Are you certain your vessel can handle those conditions? Elena looked around the bridge, watching her crew work with the calm efficiency that had made humanity's exploration program legendary among the few species that knew about it. Commander, 3 weeks ago you questioned whether humans were strong enough to survive in a galaxy filled with superior species. Today you're going to see what we do when everyone else says something can't be done. She closed the communication channel and turned back to Captain Torres. Begin approach, Captain. Let's show them what fragile really means. The Endeavour began its descent toward Kepler 442c, riding the gravitational waves like a surfer navigating impossible seas. On the observation screens, Elena watched the planet grow larger, its surface scarred by massive fissures and glowing with the heat of exposed geological processes. Behind them, the Council's escort ships maintained their safe distance, their crews undoubtedly wondering if they were about to witness a rescue mission or a spectacular disaster. Elena had wondered the same thing herself, but as she watched her crew work with the focused determination that defined humanity's approach to impossible challenges, she felt something she hadn't experienced. Since leaving Earth, she felt proud. The planet's gravitational field grabbed the Endeavour and began pulling it toward the surface in a dance of physics that would have destroyed any ship trying to fight against it. But Captain Torres wasn't fighting. She was dancing with the forces that threatened to tear them apart, using humanity's greatest strength against the galaxy's most hostile environment. Approaching the surface, Torres reported calmly. Gravitational stress within acceptable parameters. Landing zone in sight. Elena smiled as she watched the impossible become routine. Take us down, Captain. Let's go find some people who need our help. The Endeavour touched down on the surface of Kepler 442c with barely a tremor, despite landing in conditions that had destroyed 3 previous rescue attempts. As the crew began preparations for surface operations, Elena opened a communication channel to Commander Thrax. Commander, we're on the surface and beginning search operations. Please stand by. The pause that followed was long enough that Elena wondered if the communication had failed. Finally, Commander Thrax's voice came through, colored by something that might have been admiration. Ambassador, how did you land on that planet? Our sensors show gravitational conditions that should have made approach impossible. Elena looked around at her crew, already moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had spent their lives turning impossible into routine. Commander, that's what humans do. We make the impossible look easy, one problem at a time. The surface of Kepler 442c was a landscape from humanity's worst nightmares, but Elena and her team moved across it with the calm professionalism of people who had trained for exactly this scenario. The mining colony's structures had been twisted and partially buried by the ongoing seismic activity, But Dr. Chen had identified 3 potential access points to the underground tunnel network, where survivors might have taken shelter. Atmospheric. Readings are marginal but breathable, with standard filtration, reported Dr. Martinez, the team's environmental specialist, as they approached the first tunnel entrance. Temperature is fluctuating between -40 and +60 degrees Celsius, but the thermal suits should handle it. Elena checked her equipment one final time. Where Council rescue teams would have deployed squads of heavily armored soldiers with enough firepower to level a small city, the human team consisted of 6 people carrying equipment that most galactic species would consider barely adequate for basic maintenance work. Dr. Chen, what's the structural integrity of these tunnels? Dr. Chen consulted her geological scanner, a device small enough to fit in her palm but packed with sensors that could analyze molecular composition through solid rock. Mixed, but survivable. The main support structures are intact, but we're seeing evidence of partial collapses in the secondary passages. If there are survivors, they're likely in the central hub areas where the original mining equipment provided additional structural support. Elena nodded and activated her communication system. Captain Torres, we're entering the tunnel network. Maintain surface contact and monitor seismic activity. If you detect any major gravitational shifts, extract immediately whether we're aboard or not. Understood, Ambassador. Good hunting. The team entered the tunnels in single file, their helmet lights cutting through darkness that seemed to absorb illumination. The passages had been carved by Brutaxian mining equipment, designed for their massive frames and heavy machinery. For humans, the tunnels felt cavernous and strangely empty. Motion sensors are picking up air circulation patterns, Dr. Martinez reported quietly. There's definitely something generating airflow deeper in the complex. Elena felt a surge of hope. Air circulation meant either functioning life support systems or people using breathing equipment. Either way, it suggested the possibility of survivors. They moved deeper into the tunnel network, following passages that branched and twisted through the planet's unstable geology. The Council's previous rescue teams had relied on detailed maps and preset navigation protocols, but those maps were now useless. The seismic activity had altered the tunnel layout so extensively that they were essentially exploring an unknown cave system. This is why the other rescue teams failed, Elena realized aloud. They were looking for the mining colony that existed 3 weeks ago. But the planet has been reshaping itself continuously since then. Dr. Chen paused at a tunnel junction, studying readings from her geological scanner. The seismic activity isn't random. There's a pattern to how the tunnels have been altered. The planet's core is trying to redistribute mass to compensate for the extracted materials, and it's following the path of least resistance. Which means, the areas that were most heavily mined are now the most unstable. But the areas that were left untouched are actually more stable than they were originally. If the survivors were smart, they would have moved to the unmined sections. Elena considered this, her mind working through the implications. The Council rescue teams had focused their search efforts on the main mining areas, following standard protocols that assumed survivors would remain near their last known positions. But humans facing a crisis didn't follow standard protocols. They adapted. Where would you go if you were a miner trapped in a collapsing tunnel system? Dr. Chen studied the geological data more carefully, away from the extraction sites toward the older survey tunnels that were carved but never fully developed. They'd be more stable, and they'd have basic life support infrastructure without the heavy machinery that might attract seismic attention. The team changed direction, following passages that led away from the main mining operation toward sections of the tunnel network that appeared on the original survey maps, but had never been fully developed. As they moved deeper, the air quality improved and the tunnel walls showed less evidence of recent seismic damage. I'm detecting life signs, Dr. Martinez announced suddenly. Multiple human biosignatures approximately 200 meters ahead and 40 meters down. Elena felt her heart rate increase. After 3 weeks of silence, the possibility of finding survivors alive seemed almost too good to be true. But the biosignatures were clear and consistent with a group of people conserving energy while maintaining basic life functions. Can you determine how many? At least 30 individuals, possibly more. The readings are being partially blocked by rock and metal, but the signatures are definitely human. The team pressed forward with renewed urgency, following passages that grew progressively narrower as they approached the source of the life signs. Finally, they reached a sealed blast door marked with mining company logos and emergency shelter designations. Elena stepped forward and activated the door's communication system. "This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez with the Galactic Council Rescue Team. Please respond if you can hear this message." For several seconds, there was no response. Then the communication crackled to life with a voice hoarse from weeks of recycled air and rationed water. "This is Deputy Mine Supervisor Jackson. Thank God we thought everyone had given up on us. We've got 41 people down here, including 3 who need immediate medical attention." Elena closed her eyes briefly, feeling relief wash over her. They had found survivors, and in greater numbers than anyone had dared hope. "Supervisor Jackson, we're here to get you out. What's your current situation?" "We sealed ourselves into Emergency Shelter 7 when the seismic activity started getting bad. We've got basic life support running on backup power. Enough food for maybe another week, and 3 people with injuries from the initial tunnel collapses. The main problem is that the primary exit passage collapsed 2 days ago, and we can't tell if any of the secondary exits are still viable." Elena looked at her team, seeing the same determination in their faces that had brought them this far. "Supervisor, we're going to get you out of there. Dr. Chen is going to analyze the structural situation and find us a safe extraction route. In the meantime, please prepare your people for evacuation. We'll need everyone ready to move quickly when we give the signal." As Dr. Chen began her geological analysis of the shelter's surroundings, Elena opened a communication channel to Captain Torres on the surface. "Captain, we found 41 survivors in Emergency Shelter 7. Beginning extraction planning now." "Outstanding news, Ambassador. Be advised that seismic activity is increasing on the surface. We're detecting signs of another major gravitational shift in approximately 6 hours." Elena felt the familiar weight of a ticking clock. They had 6 hours to extract 41 people from a shelter buried under unstable rock, through tunnel passages that might collapse at any moment, and get them to a ship small enough to escape the planet's gravitational chaos before the next major seismic event. She looked around at her team of 6, people with their minimal equipment and impossible mission parameters. Any council species would have declared the situation hopeless and begun planning memorial services. Elena smiled. This was exactly the kind of challenge that humans lived for. "Dr. Chen, what's our extraction timeline?" Dr. Chen looked up from her scanner, her expression focused but optimistic. "I can get us a safe route to the shelter, but the passage will only be stable for about 4 hours. After that, the seismic stress will compromise the support structures. 4 hours to extract 41 people through unstable tunnels to a ship that needs to launch before the next gravitational event," Elena calculated quickly. "It's going to be close." "Ambassador," Dr. Martinez added quietly, "there's something else. The 3 injured survivors will need to be carried out. They can't move under their own power." Elena nodded. The situation had just become significantly more complicated. But as she looked at her team, she saw the same expression she had seen on the faces of human explorers for generations, the look of people who had been told something was impossible and were already figuring out how to prove that assessment wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen, we came here to do the impossible. Time to get started." The next 3 hours became a masterpiece of human efficiency and improvisation. While Dr. Chen worked to create a stable evacuation route using controlled micro-explosions to relieve seismic pressure points, Elena coordinated with the survivors to establish an extraction sequence that would move 41 people through narrow tunnel passages in record time. "The key is not to think of this as a rescue operation," Elena explained to Deputy Supervisor Jackson over the communication link. "Think of it as a logistics challenge. We're moving a specific number of people a specific distance in a specific time frame. Everything else is just environmental obstacles." Inside Emergency Shelter 7, the survivors had organized themselves with the kind of desperate efficiency that came from 3 weeks of rationed supplies and uncertain futures. The 3 injured workers, 2 with broken bones from tunnel collapses and 1 with internal injuries from the equipment malfunction, had been prepared for transport using improvised stretchers made from mining equipment. "Dr. Martinez, what's our atmospheric situation in the evacuation tunnels?" Elena asked as the team worked to stabilize the route Dr. Chen had mapped. "Mixed but manageable. We'll have breathable air for most of the route, but there are 3 sections where we'll need to use emergency oxygen supplies. The good news is that the tunnel modifications Dr. Chen made actually improved air circulation." Elena nodded, checking her chronometer. 2 hours remaining until the next major seismic event, and they hadn't even begun moving people yet. But the preliminary work was nearly complete, and once they started the evacuation, human efficiency would take over. Captain Torres, status report from the surface. Gravitational distortions are intensifying on schedule. I've calculated our launch window. We need to be airborne in 90 minutes to avoid the worst of the next gravitational wave. 90 minutes to move 41 people, including 3 stretcher cases, through partially collapsed tunnels to a ship that could barely accommodate them all. Elena felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with impossible deadlines and minimal resources. Dr. Chen, are we ready to begin evacuation? Dr. Chen looked up from her final structural analysis, her expression confident. The route is stable for the next 93 minutes. After that, I can't guarantee tunnel integrity. 93 minutes, Elena repeated. That gives us a 3-minute safety margin. She activated her communication with the shelter. Supervisor Jackson, we're beginning evacuation now. Send out your first group of 10 people, starting with your most mobile individuals. The evacuation began with the smooth precision of people who understood that their lives depended on following instructions exactly. The first group of survivors moved through the tunnel system like they were running a carefully choreographed race, with Elena's team positioned at key points to provide guidance and assistance. What should have been a chaotic scramble of panicked people instead became a demonstration of human problem-solving under pressure. Each group of survivors adapted to the tunnel conditions quickly, helping each other navigate obstacles and maintaining the pace necessary to complete the evacuation on schedule. This is incredible, came Commander Thrax, voice over the communication channel from the escort fleet. Our psychological models predicted panic and disorder when moving large groups through hostile environments under time pressure. Elena smiled as she watched the 8th group of survivors move past her position with the calm efficiency of experienced miners, following a well-planned work schedule. Commander, panic is a luxury we can't afford. When humans face extinction-level challenges, we don't waste time on emotions that don't help us survive. The 3 injured survivors presented the greatest challenge, requiring careful coordination to move their improvised stretchers through passages barely wide enough for single-file movement. But the mining crews had worked in tight spaces their entire careers, and they handled the transport problem with the same methodical approach they used for moving heavy equipment through narrow mine shafts. 50 minutes remaining, Captain Torres reported from the surface. Seismic activity is increasing ahead of schedule. We may need to adjust our departure time. Elena checked her position in the tunnel system. The last group of survivors was still 40 minutes away from the surface, and the injured workers were moving slower than optimized projections had indicated. Dr. Chen, can you buy us any additional time with the tunnel stability? Dr. Chen consulted her geological scanner, her expression troubled. The seismic stresses are building faster than predicted. I can try to relieve some pressure points, but there's a risk that the controlled explosions could trigger larger collapses. Elena weighed the options quickly. They could continue with the current evacuation plan and risk being caught in the tunnels when the next seismic event struck, or they could take calculated risks to speed up the process. Do it, but focus on the sections where the injured survivors will be moving. Everyone else can handle some instability, but the stretcher teams need maximum route security. Dr. Chen began placing shaped charges at carefully calculated stress points, using controlled explosions to redirect seismic pressure away from the evacuation route. The technique was risky. Too much explosive force could collapse the entire tunnel system. Too little would have no effect on the building geological stresses. 30 minutes remaining, Torres announced. I'm detecting gravitational anomalies that suggest the next major event could be larger than previous occurrences. Elena felt the countdown pressure that every human explorer knew, the point where success or failure came down to the last few minutes of available time. Around her, the survivors continued moving with disciplined efficiency, but she could see the strain in their faces as they pushed themselves to maintain the necessary pace. Final group approaching the surface access point, Dr. Martinez reported. Injured survivors are 10 minutes behind schedule, but still within the safety margin. Elena allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. They were going to make it. 41 people extracted from an impossible situation using equipment that most galactic species would consider inadequate for basic maintenance work. Then, Dr. Chen's geological scanner began emitting an alarm tone that Elena had hoped never to hear. Massive seismic event. Building ahead of schedule, Dr. Chen announced grimly. The tunnel system has maybe 15 minutes before catastrophic structural failure. Elena looked at the display showing the positions of her team and the remaining survivors. The injured workers were still 8 minutes away from the surface, and at their current pace, they wouldn't make it out before the tunnels collapsed. Captain Torres, can you extend our departure window? Negative, Ambassador. If we don't launch in the next 20 minutes, the gravitational distortions will prevent any spacecraft from leaving the planet's surface. Elena stared at the display, her mind racing through possibilities. They had come so far, saved so many people, but the final few minutes were threatening to undo everything they had accomplished. Then she looked at her team and saw the same expression she had been seeing for weeks, the look of humans who had been told something was impossible and were preparing to prove that assessment wrong. Dr. Chen, how much additional time could we gain if we accelerated the tunnel clearing process? Dr. Chen understood immediately. If we used larger explosive charges to create a more direct route for the stretcher teams, we could cut their travel time by at least 5 minutes. But the blast effects would make the tunnels impassable for anyone else, which means whoever sets the charges would be trapped underground. Elena looked around at her team, seeing the same calculation in every face. Someone would have to stay behind to ensure the final survivors reached safety. I'll do it, Dr. Chen said immediately. I know the geological situation better than anyone else. No, Elena replied firmly. I brought us here and I'm responsible for everyone getting home safely. She was already moving toward the explosive charges when Dr. Martinez grabbed her arm. Ambassador, with respect, you're wrong. We all brought us here and we're all responsible for everyone getting home safely. This isn't a command decision, it's a team decision. Elena looked around at her crew, seeing the determination in their faces. These were people who had spent their careers taking impossible risks to save lives, and they weren't about to stop now. Dr. Chen, set the charges. Everyone else, help me get those stretchers to the surface. As the team began their final desperate sprint to save the last survivors, Elena opened a communication channel to Commander Thrak. Commander, we're implementing emergency extraction protocols. Please be ready to receive survivors. What about your team, Ambassador? Elena looked ahead to where her people were already moving with the focused efficiency that had brought them this far. Commander, we're humans. We don't leave people behind and we don't accept impossible odds. We'll see you on the surface. The controlled explosions that Dr. Chen triggered deep in the tunnel system sent shockwaves through the already unstable geological structure, but they also created exactly what the evacuation needed, a more direct route to the surface that cut precious minutes from the travel time for the injured survivors. Elena and Dr. Martinez carried the stretcher for the most severely injured miner, a woman named Sarah Kim, who had been caught in machinery during the initial seismic event. Behind them, 4 other team members and surviving miners carried the other 2 injured workers through passages that were actively shifting around them as the planet's core continued its violent restructuring. Tunnel integrity holding for now, Dr. Chen reported over the communication system as she followed behind the stretcher teams, monitoring the geological situation with instruments that registered stress levels approaching catastrophic failure. But we're running out of time fast. Elena could feel the planet trying to tear itself apart beneath their feet. Dust and debris rained from the tunnel ceiling with each tremor, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the enormous forces reshaping Kepler 442c's internal structure. Surface access in sight, Dr. Martinez announced, and Elena felt a surge of hope as she saw daylight filtering down through the tunnel opening ahead of them. They emerged onto the planet's surface to find Captain Torres and the Endeavor's crew, loading the last of the uninjured survivors into the ship's emergency passenger compartment. The vessel was designed to carry 12 people comfortably, but human ingenuity had reconfigured the internal space to accommodate 41 survivors, plus the rescue team. Captain, status report, Elena called as her team rushed the stretchers toward the ship's medical bay. We have maybe 8 minutes before the gravitational distortions make launch impossible, Torres replied, supervising the final loading procedures with the calm efficiency that had made her one of humanity's most respected exploration captains. The ship's packed beyond any reasonable safety margin, but the engineering team says we can maintain life support for the flight to the escort fleet. Elena helped load Sarah Kim's stretcher into the medical bay, where Dr. Martinez immediately began emergency treatment procedures. Around them, the other survivors packed themselves into spaces barely large enough to accommodate their numbers, but Elena heard no complaints. These were people who had spent 3 weeks expecting to die on an alien world. Being rescued by a ship that was technically overloaded was not something they were inclined to argue about. Dr. Chen, final geological assessment? Dr. Chen looked up from her instruments, her expression grim but determined. The planet's core is entering final destabilization. We've got maybe 6 minutes before the tunnel system experience is complete. Structural collapse and probably less than 10 before the gravitational anomalies become permanent. Elena felt the familiar weight of a countdown that allowed no margin for error. Around her, 47 people were depending on decisions made in the next few minutes. Decisions that would determine whether their rescue mission ended in triumph or disaster. Captain Torres, begin launch sequence. Everyone else secure for immediate departure. The Endeavour lifted off from Kepler 442c's surface with the kind of precision that only came from decades of dangerous exploration missions. Captain Torres rode the gravitational waves like a surfer navigating impossible seas, using the planet's own instability to boost their escape velocity while avoiding the gravitational anomalies that had destroyed the previous rescue attempts. Gravitational stress approaching hull tolerance limits, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported from the navigation station. But we're climbing away from the primary distortion field. Elena watched the surface of Kepler 442c fall away beneath them, scarred by massive fissures that glowed with the heat of the planet's exposed core. In the medical bay, Dr. Martinez worked to stabilize the injured survivors, while the rest of the mining crew packed into every available space throughout the ship. "Ambassador," came Commander Thrack's voice over the communication system from the escort fleet. "We're reading your transponder, but the gravitational distortions are affecting our sensors. What's your status?" 44 survivors aboard and ascending, Elena replied. 3 team members still conducting final evacuation procedures. There was a pause, and Elena realized that her response had confused the Chronari commander. She had reported 44 survivors when the mining colony had only contained 43 people. "Ambassador, please clarify survivor count." Elena looked around at her crew, understanding flooding through her. In the desperate final minutes of the evacuation, she had been thinking like a ship's captain responsible for everyone under her command, not like a diplomat counting categories of people. "Commander, I'm reporting 41 mining colony survivors, plus 3 members of my crew who stayed behind to ensure the evacuation succeeded. All 44 people are now aboard the Endeavour and ascending to safety." The communication channel remained silent for several moments. Finally, Commander Thrack's voice returned, colored by something that might have been amazement. "Ambassador, you included your own crew members in the survivor count?" Elena looked around at her team. "Dr. Chen monitoring geological readings to ensure they had safely escaped the planet's gravitational chaos. Dr. Martinez treating injured miners with the same care he would give to heads of state. Captain Torres flying an overloaded ship through impossible gravitational conditions with the skill that had kept them alive through dozens of similar missions. Commander, when humans undertake a mission to save lives, we don't categorize people by their species or their job descriptions or their diplomatic status. We just count human beings who need to get home safely. But your crew volunteered for this mission. They understood the risks when they agreed to participate." Elena smiled, finally understanding the disconnect. "Commander, so did the miners. They chose to work on a dangerous world extracting materials that the galaxy needs. The only difference between my crew and the mining colony personnel is that my people had more recent training in how to survive impossible situations." The Endeavour cleared Kepler 442c's gravitational field and docked with Commander Thrack's flagship 23 minutes after leaving the planet's surface. As the survivors were transferred to proper medical facilities and temporary quarters, Elena found herself standing on the observation deck where this entire adventure had begun weeks earlier. Commander Thrack approached her, his massive frame no longer seeming quite as intimidating as it had during their first meeting. "Ambassador, I owe you an apology. When we first met, I questioned whether humans possessed the strength necessary to survive in a galaxy dominated by more physically powerful species. Elena looked out at Kepler 442c, which was now visibly restructuring itself as massive gravitational forces reshaped its entire planetary structure. The mining colony, where 41 people had spent 3 weeks waiting for rescue, was now buried under miles of shifted rock and flowing lava. Commander, physical strength was never the issue. The Council's previous rescue missions failed not because they lacked sufficient firepower or protective equipment, but because they approached an adaptive challenge with rigid solutions. And humans approach adaptive challenges differently? Elena turned to face the Chronari commander, and for the first time since meeting him, she saw something like respect in his expression. Commander, humans have been solving impossible problems with inadequate resources for our entire evolutionary history. It's not that we're stronger or smarter or more technologically advanced than other species. It's that we're very good at making the best of bad situations. Commander Thrak looked out at the planet that had nearly claimed 44 lives, then back at the human ambassador, who had led a rescue mission that everyone had expected to fail. Ambassador Vasquez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I would like to formally request that humanity accept full membership status with all associated rights and responsibilities. Elena smiled, thinking about the months of diplomatic negotiations that had brought them to this moment, and the 41 people who were now safe because humans refused to accept that some challenges were impossible. Commander, humanity accepts your invitation, but I think you should understand what you're getting into. We're the species that looks at impossible situations and starts making plans to prove that assessment wrong. Commander Thrak's expression shifted to what Elena was beginning to recognize as the Chronari equivalent of a grin. Ambassador, after watching your rescue mission, I'm beginning to think the galaxy could use a little more of that attitude. 6 months after the Kepler 442c rescue mission, Elena found herself once again standing in the Galactic Council's main assembly chamber. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of dismissive whispers about human fragility, delegates from across the galaxy were engaged in animated discussions about adaptive, problem-solving techniques and the revolutionary approaches that humanity had introduced to interstellar crisis management. The rescue mission had become legendary throughout Council space, not just because of its success, but because of how fundamentally it had changed the way galactic civilizations thought about impossible challenges. The video records of a small human ship successfully navigating gravitational anomalies that had destroyed much larger and more advanced vessels had been studied by every major species military and exploration academies. Ambassador Vasquez called the Zephyrian delegate, their crystalline form chiming with what Elena had learned to recognize as excitement. Our Deep Space Exploration Division has requested human consultation on 3 separate missions that were previously considered too dangerous to attempt. Elena nodded politely, still adjusting to her new role as humanity's permanent representative to the Council. The position came with far more responsibility than she had originally anticipated, as species after species discovered that human adaptability could solve problems that had been stumping galactic civilization for centuries. We'd be happy to provide consultation, Delegate Christia. What types of missions are you considering? Research expeditions to systems with unstable stellar phenomena, rescue operations in regions with unusual space-time distortions, and most intriguingly, first contact protocols for species that exist in environmental conditions incompatible with standard Council life support systems. Elena smiled. In the month since Kepler 442c, humanity had become the galaxy's go-to species for missions that required adaptability over raw power or advanced technology. It was a role that suited human psychology perfectly. The more impossible a situation appeared, the more determined humans became to find a solution. Commander Thrak approached from across the chamber, his massive frame now familiar and welcome, rather than intimidating. The Chronari had become humanity's strongest supporters in the Council, often serving as advocates for human-led missions when other species expressed skepticism about unconventional approaches. Ambassador, I bring greetings from the Chronari High Command and a formal request for human assistance with a situation that has been developing in the Outer Rim territories. What kind of situation, Commander? A colony ship carrying 15,000 settlers from multiple species went missing 3 weeks ago in a region of space known for unusual electromagnetic phenomena. Long-range sensors detected their emergency beacon 2 days ago, but the electromagnetic interference makes conventional rescue operations impossible. Elena felt the familiar spark of interest that came with challenging rescue scenarios. What have the preliminary reconnaissance missions discovered? That's the problem. No reconnaissance missions have been successful. The electromagnetic phenomena disable most standard sensor systems and communication equipment. We can detect the presence of the colony ship, but we can't communicate with them or determine their current status. Elena looked around the chamber, noting the expressions of the various delegates. She was beginning to recognize the pattern. Whenever the council encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through conventional applications of superior technology or overwhelming force, they turned to humanity for creative alternatives. Commander, are you asking if humans would be willing to attempt a rescue mission that multiple council species have declared impossible? Commander Thrax's expression shifted to what Elena now knew was the Chronari equivalent of a grin. Ambassador, over the past 6 months, we've learned that when humans use the word impossible, it usually means they're about to start making plans. Elena laughed, understanding that her species' reputation in the galaxy had evolved considerably since that first diplomatic meeting months earlier. Humans were no longer seen as fragile creatures struggling to survive in a hostile universe. Instead, they had become known as the species that specialized in turning impossible situations into routine problems. I'll need to consult with our Exploration Command. But yes, Commander, humanity would be very interested in attempting that rescue mission. 15,000 people represents one of the largest populations ever reported missing in Council space. There's something else, Commander Thrax added, his tone becoming more serious. The colony ship isn't just carrying settlers. It's transporting the complete cultural archives and genetic preservation samples for 3 different species whose homeworlds were recently destroyed by stellar collapse events. If we lose that ship, we lose 3 entire civilizations. The chamber fell quiet as the implications became clear. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a race to prevent the complete extinction of 3 galactic species. Elena felt the weight of responsibility that came with being humanity's representative to problems of galactic importance, but she also felt the excitement that every human explorer knew when presented with a challenge that combined high stakes, impossible odds, and minimal resources. Commander, you should understand that if humans accept this mission, we're going to approach it the same way we approached Kepler 442c. We'll use whatever resources are necessary, take whatever risks are required, and we won't stop until those 15,000 people are safe, even if it means risking human lives to save non-human populations. Elena looked around the chamber at delegates representing dozens of different species, each with their own biology, psychology, and cultural priorities. 6 months ago, they had seen humanity as a weak species barely qualified for galactic civilization. Now they were asking humans to risk everything to save 3 civilizations from extinction. Commander, humans learned a long time ago that survival isn't just about protecting your own species. It's about building relationships, solving problems together, and making sure that intelligence and creativity continue to exist in the universe. Those 15,000 people aren't just aliens who need rescue. They're potential allies, friends and partners in building a better galaxy. The Brutaxian delegate stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber floor. Ambassador Vasquez, the Brutaxian Mining Consortium would like to offer our full support for this mission. We owe humanity a debt from the Kepler 442c. Operation, your rescue team saved 41 miners who have become some of our most skilled personnel in hazardous environment operations. Elena nodded gratefully. Thank you, Delegate. We'll certainly need all the support we can get. One by one, the other delegates offered resources, expertise, and assistance for the rescue mission. The Zephyrian crystalline technology for electromagnetic analysis, Fortani atmospheric specialists for life support systems, Chronari escort fleets for protection and logistics support. As Elena listened to species after species volunteer to contribute to a human-led mission, she realized that Kepler 442c had accomplished something far more significant than just saving 41 miners. It had demonstrated that the galaxy's problems could be solved through cooperation between species with different strengths, rather than competition between civilizations trying to prove their individual superiority. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished delegates, Elena announced formally, humanity accepts the mission to locate and rescue the missing colony ship and its 15,000 passengers. We'll begin mission planning immediately and depart as soon as our exploration teams are ready. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Commander Thrak remained behind to speak with Elena privately. Ambassador, I have a personal question, if I may. Of course, Commander. 6 months ago, I questioned whether humans were strong enough to survive in this galaxy. Now we're asking you to save entire civilizations from extinction. How do you process that kind of responsibility? Elena looked out through the chamber's observation windows at the star field beyond, thinking about the colony ship somewhere in that vast darkness carrying the last remnants of 3 different species. Commander, humans have always understood that strength isn't about how much force you can apply to a problem. Real strength is about how much responsibility you're willing to accept for making things better. We're not trying to prove we're the strongest or the smartest species in the galaxy. We're just trying to make sure that when impossible situations arise, someone is willing to attempt a solution. Commander Thrak nodded slowly. And if this mission fails? If we lose not just the colony ship but the human crew attempting to rescue them? Elena smiled and Commander Thrak recognized the expression that had become legendary. Throughout council space, the look humans got when they were about to attempt something that everyone else considered impossible. Commander, failure is always possible, but humans learned long ago that some things are worth risking everything to protect. 15,000 lives and the continuation of 3 civilizations definitely qualify. As Elena left the chamber to begin planning humanity's next impossible mission, she reflected on how much had changed since that first diplomatic meeting. The galaxy had stopped calling humans fragile, but Elena suspected they still didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. Humans weren't fragile. They were anti-fragile. They got stronger when exposed to stress, more creative when faced with impossible odds, and more determined when everyone else gave up hope. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson again, one impossible rescue mission at a time. In the depths of space, 15,000 people waited for salvation aboard a colony ship trapped in electromagnetic chaos. They didn't know that their rescue was already being planned by a species that specialized in making the impossible look routine. They were about to discover what it meant to be saved by humans, the species that had turned impossible into their favorite kind of challenge.